Catalina, welcome.
Thank you.
How are you today?
Good. Very excited.
Thank you very much for inviting me into your home and for a lovely lunch earlier on. Thank you also for being part of the podcast. So just for the listeners and the viewers, they'll have a bit of a bio about you, but tell us a little bit about what you're doing at the moment in terms of your work and what your passions are at the moment.
Good. Well, my name is Catalina Mahecha, Cruz. I'm Colombian. I'm 38 years old. And I have been an end-of-life doula for 8 years in Colombia. And with the pandemic, my service went just like a global service. During the pandemic, many things happened in terms of how we were living, death and dying, and what were the solutions that we were at that moment coming with in order to help people to navigate death, and in order to also help people who were not allowed to move, like to be physically present with the dying, to come out with some strategies of being present somehow. So at the moment, what I have been doing is being a doula for migrants.
Right.
Which means that I am here to support people who, as I am, are living in another countries and they are not able to support or be physically present with their families in their countries of origin, which is very painful. And at the same time, helping people, who are living overseas to face existential questions, not just about death and dying that every human being faces, but also the logistics that are behind that.
Okay.
Especially when you live in an island in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
And that can be very expensive. So I'm an end-of-life doula, and right now I'm really trying to have a voice for not just for me, but for migrants, because we are many in this country.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to have conversations. So this is why I'm very happy to be here with you around what are the questions or how can we improve the services that are already there in terms of care, but also in terms of the funeral industry.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I'm doing at the moment.
Okay.
And for living, I work as a manager in a non-for-profit with the education sector.
Okay. So if we go back to Colombia, tell me a little bit about death and dying in Colombia. How's that sort of seen from that cultural perspective?
That's a great question. And I think the first thing that it will be interesting to understand is how different the context, not just the culture, is. We are in the middle of a demographic transition, which means that just until now, Latin America, especially Colombia, is starting to have more than 20% of the population over 65.
Right.
So all of the questions that the European countries or the developed countries or the northern countries have been facing for 30 or 40 years are just new to our cultures, right? We are just facing until now the fact that people are living longer, number one, and number two, that we have the technologies and the tools to make people live for, 100 years.
Yeah.
So that's something that's important to mention, because we are just starting to face all of the problems in terms of ethics and morals that these countries have been talking about for years and years and years.
Right.
Which means that we don't have the infrastructure that you already have in place in Australia or in Europe.
Yeah.
It means that we don't have hospices in place. We just have a couple of them in Colombia. I might be wrong, but we just have 4 probably nationwide for a population of 55 million people. So This is how new this is. In terms of palliative care, we don't have as many doctors and nurses as we might need to have at the moment. Mm-hmm. And most importantly, we are not facing the care crisis that the United States or Europe are facing at the moment, because we are family oriented. We are still a community or a society in which families are big enough to take care of their elders. And elders are still living with us. So of course, we are in a moment, I think we are in a transition. So elders are moving to nursing houses, but lots of them are still living with their families. So primary care is not hospice, is not hospital, is family. So this community approach makes that the conversation is different. We are also a very Catholic country, so we have, even if we are not Catholic, in religiously talking, culturally talking, we are. So God is just part of the language, like God bless you. Hi, how are you doing? God, like if God wants you to. So it's an interesting point in which we are transitioning to a society that is getting older. We are in a transition in which young people are not that religious, so we are open to have the conversation about medical assisted dying and about how to die. Right? But our elders are not there. But incredibly, in Colombia, for 35 years or more, we have had the right to die with dignity. And today we are part of the very short list of countries in which medical assisted dying is fully legal. So that's a surprise because that's not the case for every country and not every country in Latin America. So that's kind of the context. And when I became an end-of-life doula, it was just very interesting to see that we have so many options, but all of these options are very difficult to teach or to make people aware of what they are, what they mean, what's the context, because the context is always important. And also try to understand how you can empower families and communities and not just leave this end of life care to hospices and to hospitals, because that infrastructure doesn't exist. And it will take like a couple of years until we get there. So the question is for me all of the time, how do we get death back home? I am completely convinced that any individual in the world is going to face death at some point. Either it's on or is going to experience, like this dying path of someone that is in this end of life. So we need to be prepared, like we need education. And this idea of an end of life doula, I think it's related to maybe we don't need to be a professional, but maybe we need to have like some basics and some very specific tools to start talking about death, dying, and grieving in a context in which we are community-based society, which is very different.
So it sounds to me from what you've said that in some ways in Colombia, things are more developed from a perspective of looking after the older people. You talked about some people going to nursing houses, which I assume is nursing homes that we call them here, or residential aged care facilities in Australia. So that's not so prevalent in Colombia, that kind of setup. And so the care for older people, generations, has been done by the families. And so you're saying that there's getting to a tipping point where that's becoming so much of a population that needs that care. How will we sustain that going forward? Is that correct?
Exactly.
And also that there aren't many palliative care services. There's so 4 hospices, you think, in Colombia, but that's inpatient settings. Tell me a little in the cities. So again, from a community perspective, is there that support from a palliative care community service? Does that exist?
It does exist, but it has been developing in the last 20 years.
Okay.
So, it has started, that movement, all of these ideas, they have arrived to Colombia, but we haven't developed them yet.
Right.
So until now, we are starting to see the first generations of palliative care specialists in terms of doctors, nurses, therapists, all of that. But you can say that everyone in Colombia has the option to ask for palliative care, even if it's, like today, this option is like more prevalent. It is not the case for the whole country.
Yeah. And so I think that's the same in many countries where access to palliative care is problematic. So what about the drugs that are used in palliative care? So the access to opioids, I know that's a problem internationally, and certainly in Latin American countries, that's a problem. Is that the same thing in Colombia? What's the access to opioids like?
Of course. So when you compare the access to this kind of medicines, especially to opium, in Latin America, in Colombia, and you compare it to the States, to Australia, or to Europe, you are going to see that in comparison, we don't have that much access, number one. Number two, there is a very specific situation in Colombia and in Latin America that I think it's relevant to mention, which is the war against drugs.
Yeah.
So, for example, Mexico and Colombia, are the first producers of coca leaf and of amapola, but we don't have access to the legal medicines that are made out of these plants.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have this war against drugs that has been going and going on for years and years, and also this discourse from the government to say that, oh, well, those plants and everything that is done out of these plants or made out of these plants is problematic. So in people's minds, it's just like, oh, well, you know what? Maybe even if I have access, I don't want to get added.
Yeah.
So people don't understand what is the use and what is the place that these kind of medicines have today, and especially at the end of life. And when they think about it, they think about it more in terms of addiction. They think more about it in terms of this is wrong. So there are these two sides. And because of the world against drugs, what we are facing is that Latin American countries are less open to legalize or to regulate better the access to these very specific products. Yeah. So, it's not just a cultural problem, but also is a policy problem.
Yeah. So there's certainly, from what you're saying, an access issue, but then also that's the same cultural things we have in UK, New Zealand, Australia, the three places I've worked in the past, I'm sure in many other countries, people have this perception around becoming an addict to opioids and therefore fear of using them. And it becomes a big problem in terms of how we look after them.
Exactly.
You mentioned Mexico in your discussion just a little bit. So obviously in Mexico, they have quite a healthy relationship in terms of with the relationship with the people who've died, the Dia de los Muertos, and that kind of festival of the dead to celebrate the people who have died. Is that the same in Colombia, or is there anything similar to that, or that attitude?
No. I think that globally, something that has really been happening since the last century is this whole idea of taking death out of the private sphere. Yeah. So before, people used to born and die in their homes, and today is less and less, right? So you don't want to see, you don't want to know about it, you don't want to talk about it. So I think that's something that is globally there. Yeah. But also, I think that we don't have, except for the indigenous people or the indigenous groups that are very important and present in Colombia, the relationship we have with the funeral industry is pretty much the same that we have here. So it's basically one option, or two options, either you go to the cemetery or you got cremated, and then that's it. You go to church, and you have very specific religious ceremonies. We are seeing an important shift, especially during the pandemic, of people trying to do more memorials, to celebrate life more, to have more intimate celebrations, live celebrations. But we don't have a healthy relationship with that. Yeah. Especially, on the top of that, because of the world against drugs, something that Colombia and Mexico share in common is the violence.
Yeah.
So it's not just death because you are ill, but it's the violence that we live in our countries. And we are not developing a healthy relationship with that at all, especially because we are a very, very, very violent country.
Yeah.
So no, I don't think we have that at all.
Yeah. And then you mentioned the indigenous population, and so different indigenous populations there, obviously. So from that perspective, are they more open to discussions about how people die, or is that again the same thing of just keeping it away because of perhaps maybe the way society is or cultural beliefs? Is that the same?
It depends on the groups.
Yeah.
But I think they have rituals.
Yeah.
And they have a view of the world that is completely different to ours. So death is clearly part of their cosmovision. It's not a big deal as it is for us. And they also have, like rituals. What I think it's the big difference in what I have seen is that they have rituals not just for death, but also for transitions in life. So, not just marriage, but when someone becomes older or it's 18 or something, they are going to have like these moments of coming together as a tribe or as a group or as a community to think about important moments of life or to reflect about important topics. So what they do have, which we don't have that much probably in our societies, is this beautiful idea of coming together to discuss about relevant topics.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have a fire, and then you're going to have the coca leaf, and then you're going to talk from your heart, and then you're going to share knowledge. And also, I think it's different the relationship they have with nature. So very interestingly, for some of them, war, like when we talk about death, it's just like, oh, I will accept death just if. It's because illness, if I am age more above 65 and I'm in my bed and they're like, and that's it. That's the only death that we are going to consider.
If I've done everything in my life that
if I'm fulfilled, I have kids, I bought a house, I travel, all of this. From their perspective, death is death, and violent death is also part of what is completely normal, because nature is the way that nature has to control, the population, and to defend herself, and to have like this balance.
Right.
So, you know what I mean? It's a completely different cosmovision of the world in which nature is part of.
Yeah.
So I think, I don't know if it's more healthy, because all of these groups have also been facing the arrival of the Occidental ideas, but for sure they have more tools to, as a community, process what is happening. I am convinced of that. And of course, it depends on where and who they are, but I think they're more like connected and open to have difficult conversations.
Yeah. So just coming back then to the immigrant side of what you're doing at the moment. So this is another passion of taking that death doula perspective, but bringing it to an immigrant population. So tell me about your movement from Colombia to Australia. So what were the things that really highlighted to you the issues for immigrants coming to Australia?
Well, I think that before coming to Australia, the pandemic happened.
Yeah.
And with the pandemic, the impossibility of global mobility. So I don't know if you remember, because people don't remember at this point the pandemic, but when people were dying in Spain, like they were dying on a daily basis.
Yeah.
They were dying alone at homes. And there was not possibility, even for those who were living in Madrid, to have a proper goodbye, and to have a funeral ritual.
Mm.
And then when it started to happen all over the world, you have people who were migrants who were reaching out and saying, Mom is dying in Colombia. I am living in the States. What can I do?
Yeah.
And I remember the first month, I was just crying. I don't know. So I think that was the first time that I realized that there was an extra layer when the mobility is reduced for any reason. But the migrant population, or the people who were not able to be physically present in the moment of death, were suffering a lot.
So did you have friends who are going through this experience in Australia, not being able to get back to Colombia?
So not in Australia, but like in the US or even in Mexico or even in Colombia, people who were just living in a different city, but they were not able to come to Bogota, which is the capital city where I was living, because of the restrictions.
Yeah.
That was nuts. That was crazy. That was crazy, crazy, crazy. So I will call here to compassion and empathy, because I think everyone at that very specific moment of history realized how hard it is to see someone dying and you can't be there even if you are in the same country. Yeah. So I know that here in Australia, even if you wanted to move from one state to another, you have to do the quarantine and you have to stay there for long. So, for years and years, people were not able to see each other, even if you were living in the same country, right? So I think, and I wanted to mention this first, because I think people can relate to what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So probably you were not a migrant in that moment, but at some point you were not able to go to visit your parents or your family or someone who was dying. With the migrant population, you have so many different layers. I think I don't think it will be interesting to go through everything, but so as migrants, we don't have the same rights. And I think that's very important and relevant, because depending on our visa status, we are going to face different problems regarding access to healthcare, but also the possibility to come back. So there are cases in which people are migrants. I don't think there is such a thing as an illegal human being, but they're illegal in the countries that they're living and working for. They can't go back. They don't have the option, even if they want to. If they come back, they will never go back. So, like you have refugees, you have illegal migrants, which are people that don't have the proper visas or the right to work in the territories. And I'm not just talking about Australia, but in general. You have another category of people, which is very interesting. And it's all of those people who are migrating because of healthcare. So they have a kid or they have someone who is dying at home, and they say, I won't let you die. We will migrate because of that. Yeah. Because I know that in other countries, you would have access to the treatments. And then you have students. So, it's a whole universe.
Yeah.
It's a whole universe. I can't compare myself. I am very, I feel at peace because I have my permanent residency. I speak English. I have 2 degrees, master degrees. And I think that from that perspective, I'm privileged. But I know that's not the experience for every single migrant. So when you look at that very diverse, we are not migrants. It's not an homogeneous group. It isn't.
Yeah.
It isn't. What might be, homogeneous, or that thing that you can relate with any person, is that when you ask, oh, what's home or where's home?
It's a very interesting question, actually, and I was recently talking to a colleague who was asked that question: where did they feel home was, and they actually said it was Sydney, but they're actually from Germany. So it's interesting to get the perspective of why that person felt that Sydney felt more like home. and it probably had more to do with who they were as a person and their character. But yeah, it's a very good question. Where do we call home? And we've certainly seen people as refugees, obviously coming into the country and trying to provide support and services for them and to enable them to have good end of life care, for example. And also visitors who are visiting their relatives and then become unwell. And then how do we best support them? So with what you've seen from this migrant population, which is heterogeneous, not homogeneous, as well as refugees, where do you think the major problems are that we can help those populations at the moment in terms of when they become unwell and supporting them in those circumstances?
So I think there are different dimensions. The first one is, of course, healthcare and the access to healthcare. Again, depending on your visa status, you are going to have a very different experience. So the Medicare card and the color of the Medicare card is going to change the experience everyone has in terms of accessing the healthcare system. I think in the literature, there have been a couple of problems that have been identified, not just in Australia, but everywhere around the world, when you have like this huge migrant population.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you are aware of this, but by 2017, I think, 3.2 million people who were living in Australia, over 65, were migrants. 3.2 million people. We are not talking about a small population here. Over 65. If I talk about the Colombian immigration, which is recent, I can tell you that we are young people who are coming to the country. And I have been living here for 14 months. And every single month, I know of someone who is dying or who died, who is under 30. So they're students, basically students. So you have a problem with access to the healthcare system in terms of how much you pay and how much you can afford to pay. Then you have these huge, huge language and cultural barriers. So, I think that I speak English and I have been living in different countries, but I can tell you that I don't know yet specifically how to use the health system.
Yeah.
It's just like, So
I think there are people who have been born here and still don't understand.
Yeah, you don't understand. So they charge you for some things they don't. It's depending if you have private insurance, they're going to cover up to, but they don't cover all of the services.
Yeah.
So it's difficult. So the systems are the healthcare system is difficult to understand for migrants, even for Australians, probably, or for people who have been living here for a while. But then you are facing the language barrier. So even in English, it's it's difficult to understand.
Yeah.
You don't have interpreters, and that's a problem that globally has been identified.
Yes.
The documents are not translated into other languages.
Yeah.
So people don't understand. They don't understand. And number two, and maybe because this is a conversation, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your own experience. But in other countries, when you are illegal, you don't want to go to the hospital. Because if you go there, you're always thinking, oh my God, even if they know that I'm illegal, I will go back home. So there is like this, there is this lack of trust in the system as a whole. With refugees, you have these traumatic experiences. And people don't want to talk about it. Last time I was talking with a person who is working with refugees in Sydney, and she was telling me, they know that they are sick, but they don't want to get a diagnosis because they know that they will die, and probably no one is going to do anything about them because the system doesn't allow them to have access to medical care.
Yeah.
And So, that there are many reasons, access, language, but also from a team perspective, this multiculturality doesn't always exist. So maybe, like if you are working in a hospital, you are not going to have one team member from one different nationality, or one team member who is going to speak Chinese, or one of the many dialects that people speak in English and in India, or Spanish, or whatever. So there is also a point that has been identified like everywhere around the world. But then when you go beyond and you think about the funeral industry, that's another problem. So here we are talking about funeral poverty. So funeral poverty is basically that all over the world, we are identifying that families and individuals are not able to afford the funerals because they are very expensive, especially in cemeteries, because of the property prices have just been raising and raising. If you die in Australia, if I die in Australia today, and I want to get a corpse repatriation, I already know that I will have to pay at least 15,000 Australian dollars.
And I think that's something that a lot of people don't know about and recognize. And certainly from my work, I've seen many people who we've had to have a conversation about, if they want to get repatriation, we try and get that sorted out while they're still alive, because it is cheaper if they are well enough to get across. And it becomes another problem that we have to make sure that we ask the right questions early enough to start planning the care accordingly. But like you say, sometimes people say, I want to go home. And really they mean home to their country.
Not home
rather than home to their houses, exactly. And sometimes home can mean heaven or wherever they are going to go after they die. So I think it's an important point you raise in terms of how people need to think about repatriation, but obviously it's very important for those immigrant populations in terms of, one, having the trust that they can go and seek the healthcare they need, and be also really meeting people who understand that they're from a different background, they may have a different health literacy. It's going to be difficult potentially to get the information in the language that they need it to be in so they can understand. And also to navigate the healthcare system. Even talking to someone who's Australian, I think sometimes it's difficult to navigate the system and for them to understand exactly the whole ins and outs of the complexities of where they are in their disease process and who they need to talk to and how to get the best care from the system. So I certainly have seen people in that situation trying to make a decision about, can we transfer this person back to their country of origin before they die? And it becomes very, very difficult. It sounds like you're talking from a personal experience or from obviously cases that you've seen. Can you elaborate a little bit more on some of those stories? Maybe that might be helpful for people to understand.
So again, I think that one of the biggest questions that I haven't identified in the different papers that I have been reading is this huge question about home. Because when you look at what has been written about death and migration, or the dying with dignity and migration, you have a lot of things that have been already identified. And I really think that in many cases, the palliative care teams have been able to say, okay, this is what we are going to do now. But this whole question, which is philosophical, of what home is something that probably is going to define the care path that you are going to build with the people who are helping you to understand where to go or what to do and at which stage. Because the planning starts earlier before you die. And it should happen when you are not in a situation in which you are ill.
If we can have that conversation about death and dying.
Exactly, yeah. So if we can have it, so I'm an identified doula. Before coming in Colombia, this is what I would love you to do. This is the music. I've been here for 14 months and I'm just still thinking like, oh, I don't know what I want, number one. Even if I know what I want, because I have started to imagine what it would look like, I don't know if the services are there for helping me to accomplish what I want to. So this discussion about home is around, where do I want to die? Do I want to die here in Australia? Do I want my family or my communities to come here to Australia and to help me? That's the first, path.
Mm-hmm.
The second path is the one that you were mentioning. Do I want to come back to my home, to my country of origin?
Mm-hmm.
And do I want to die there? Both of them have different problems and different actors that need to be involved.
Mm-hmm.
So in the first scenario, specific case, here we're going to talk about experience. I need my community, my family to come to Australia and to be with me. How? I'm illegal. How am I going to help my parents to come to help me?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the visa, we are just talking about papers.
Mm-hmm.
Last year, there was a very important case from a Colombian couple. They were living not in California, in the States. I am quite sure that their status was illegal. She was pregnant. She was 27 or 28, like above 30. She was pregnant. She was having headaches. She didn't have access to the medical system or to the health system. And then when it just became too much, they realized that she had brain cancer. So she delivered the baby. And then they say, there is really nothing we can do for you. You are going to die in a couple of weeks. So you had a dad with 3 kids, a newborn, a woman who was dying, and the impossibility for them to have their closest communities, their parents, to come because of their status. So what happened at the end of the day is that they started, they were influencers, so they started this campaign to push, like in Colombia and in the States. So it was like this huge, but you won't believe it was just like this huge media campaign. They went to every single show to tell people about their stories. So at the end of the day, I think less than a week before she died, the Colombian government was able to push, there was like a fast track. Yeah.
To get family there.
Yeah. So family there was the passport, the visas, and then people in the Latin American community, because they're very well organized in the States, pushing and asking all of the national authorities that were in charge of receiving these people to make that happen.
Yeah.
So the family arrived and she passed away a couple of days after that, so just 4 days. Do you imagine the amount of money, energy, and time that it took to have 2 people just to go there, to be present for 4 days because they needed to see that her daughter was dying.
And this would have been during COVID as well. COVID would have been a factor. No, this was before COVID, was it?
It was worse. During COVID, it was worse.
Yes, yeah.
Because even if you had the papers, or even if you had the visa,
you had another reason to not be denied.
No international flights.
Yeah.
Even if you had the money, you couldn't. No flights. So here we are not talking about the pandemic, but to make people be more empathetic about the situation. So in this first, maybe romanticized idea of I want my community to come.
What about the community that might be here already? So is there a big Colombian community in Australia or in Melbourne?
In Melbourne, there is. But that was my second fault. There is a community. There is a community who can support you. But when you ask someone what do you think home is, they're going to think about very specifically mom, dad, siblings. So even if you have a lot of people around you, like trying to support you or to contain you in this,
you want the special people there.
You will always want the special people there, and the special people they would like to be there.
Yeah.
So in terms of the logistics, in this case that I'm talking about, this very specific example, maybe these people didn't even have an idea of how to apply to a USA visa. It's so complicated. Maybe they don't even know how to use a computer to get the online application, and maybe they didn't have the money to pay for the visa. We are not even talking about, the tickets. So from moment number one, you can see how a family is going to face all of these administrative barriers that if you are just thinking that home is where you live and your community is just around, and maybe they just need to take a train or a tram or a car to drive, you are not going to face. And you don't think about the money and the resources that you need to have in order to make people come. So let's suppose that we are in Australia and we want to have 2 people to come from Colombia. Just the tickets and the visa for one person will be around $3,000 to $3,500 if they're not coming Christmas. That's expensive. Yeah, that's very expensive. Yeah. And then when they arrive, they earn in Colombian pesos. So there is already like this huge disparity because people earning in Colombian pesos can't afford to live a life in Australia. It's too expensive for them. So the economical burden that families from migrants have to face is 25 times higher than the burden that families as general face when they have someone who is already ill or at the end of life. You know what I mean? Number one.
Yeah.
And number two, they arrive here. They don't speak English. They don't speak English. So in terms of social workers, that it's important to understand if it is possible for these people to come, where are they going to live? Yeah. So in some specific countries, I know that there are specific programs. So they are going to live in the hospitals while their families, the person who is ill is going to be there. So they are supported. They have a community that is supporting them with money or with food or with shelter or whatever. But also they will have to face to talk to the doctors. And the doctor will come and will tell them in English what is happening. I don't get you. I don't understand anything.
Yeah, I mean, there are interpreting services that obviously will be utilised in those cases, and obviously there is an issue. I mean, I know that some hospitals have accommodation for relatives coming. They could be interstate. They could be even from within the same state. So there are those resources, but how long a person stays there for and how much it costs is another consideration.
Exactly.
So let's think about.
It doesn't have like all of the money.
Yeah. So then we've considered all those aspects of you being here and trying to bring the people you love closer to you. The other option is, like you say, to be able to plan to go back and to be back in Colombia and to then be with the people you love there. So tell me about that second option.
So the second option, when?
Yeah.
And who is going to pay for it again? So through case, Switzerland, Colombia. So in Switzerland, you have a very interesting network of volunteers who are supporting migrant population. They want people to go back to their countries of origin. So they have special programs for paying for the tickets for people to go back. So there was this person who was, I think he had like a brain cancer or something. And he was really at the end of his life, really at the end of his life. So if that person wanted to come back, it was not just about paying for an economy, ticket, but it was about paying for business ticket for him and for, I don't know if it was a nurse or a doctor or someone. Exactly, for an escort.
Yeah.
And that went up to 30,000 euros, just, to get back. But then you will have to face two situations. So you're coming back after being away. Depending on where you want to go, let's suppose that you're going to Colombia. If you go back to Bogota, good, because you know that the services are going to be there for you and probably you can afford them. But if you go to another city or if you go, to a rural area, who's going to take care of you? Yeah. So here you have access to palliative care.
Yeah.
Here you have access to medicines, and there you don't know.
Yeah.
And there you don't have the relationship that you have with your palliative care team or with your doctor. And all of this history and all of these discussions that that have already happened are not there.
Yeah. Or will have to be translated to carry with you.
And you have to go again through this very painful and uncomfortable situation of explaining or maybe even justifying yourself of why you decided to go through palliative care in a country that doesn't understand that yet.
Yeah.
But I think the main problem is going to be around the access to medicines.
Yeah.
That's the biggest pain that we face in those countries.
Yeah.
But even if you go back, so I was back to Colombia for 5 weeks, go back and I will see my family. And after 2 or 3 days, oh my God, this is not home. I was staring at my parents and I need, I need my space. I need my. So
it raises the question, which I've been thinking about to get to, because obviously I wanted to talk about the two different scenarios that you painted, but the question is, where do you call home, Catalina?
I don't know. And that's this reflection that I have been having with me and with other people. And also, I think that to this point, unfortunately, I'm just trying to figure out what are the paths, the options, the problems, and the resources.
Yeah.
Because the resources are a huge issue. Whatever I want to do, there is this big barrier of money or resources.
Yeah.
I don't know what home is, because home is Colombia. I have been here just for 14 months, right? But there, I don't have a safe space in which I would say I want to die here. I don't want to die at a hospital. But probably if I go back, I will have to, because there I will feel, supported, contained. But my house is not going to be my house. I don't know if my parents want to see me dying in their place. So there are a lot of discussions that are very uncomfortable that I will have to face with them. But there was one more thing that I have been thinking about. And it's something, it's not new, but it's important, which is this idea of medical assisted time. When you talk, maybe, I am completely sure that people come to you, okay, doctor, when am I going to die? When? Tell me a day and a time. When you plan for your death, you're okay, so I want my pet here, mom, dad, my cousin, 25 friends. These people are not going to get just the time to come and to stay there for months or for days, waiting just for you to die. That's also reality. So there is this new dimension that I've never thought of the medical assistant dying, which is if for some reason I get diagnosed of a terminal disease, whatever it is. And if for me, home is Colombia. And if for me, what it's important, it's to be surrounded by my community, family, and friends. That option is going to be more relevant than it was before coming here. Because there you really have the possibility to have everything under control and to plan. But you will have to justify it to people and be like, no, but how? You need to fight. You need to keep, like all of this kind
justify it to people in Colombia?
Yeah. If I want to say goodbye or if I want to, like those conversations that you might not want to have in this new context of Catalina is ill and she wants to come back, and then she knows that she's going to die on July the 11th.
Would you talk to them about that, to say this is your choice that you're making, and that to try and prepare them so that therefore when you get there you don't have those conversations to have to deal with?
Exactly. Because if I want to get home, it's not just because, and that's something that I have been thinking about of. It's not just because of me. As a doula, I always open the door to those conversations and to these goodbyes, to these closures to happen. So if I'm coming back, it's to do that, the closure. Yeah. Not just it's to open the opportunity for me and for those who I know are close to me and they love me, to say bye. And to say bye in a way in which is going to be meaningful for me, but that at the same time is going to help them with the breathing process. So I don't know if it's just like this huge thing. In Colombia, there are all of the options are legal. Then it's just about, should I rent an Airbnb? Should I go to a hospital? Am I going to stay at my parents' place? Because
these are the logistics, and I suppose logistics. Yeah. I mean, I think the issue is about trying to. I mean, when people come to us and say, "How long have I got?" We're not gods. We don't have a crystal ball. I could say to someone, "You've got 3 months." Sometimes people say 3 months because the next visit in the outpatient clinic is going to be in 3 months' time, or the chemotherapy cycle is going to be, we'll roughly know, given the cycles that you've had, we'll see you in 3 months and see how you're doing. And then we'll go from there. But it also pushes out that, and if someone dies before that 3 months, then the family could come back and say, well, you said we have 3 months, you've cheated us. If you go back and, you said I have 3 months and I'm here 6 months, 12 months later on, what do you know? Do you know what you're talking about? Because, we planned things for 3 months and then now we're still here and what's going on. So this is not something that I specifically tell people to give people a number. I think we have to look at how people are deteriorating and work out what we can change, and then look at the trajectory and give an idea of the rate of deterioration. That gives us an idea. It's a ballpark figure.
Of course.
And prognosis is a huge guesstimate.
You never know.
We're getting more information to maybe get a better sense, but I don't think it's an art that medicine has worked on for many years. I mean, we're good at diagnosing things, we're good at treating things, supposedly, but prognostication is another thing. Okay, we like to have a diagnosis, certainly. So that's one thing, and I think that, it's difficult for people to plan, but they don't have all the information at their fingertips. And we like to be in control of things. But I think it's interesting what you say from two perspectives. One is, where is home? And where do we feel that home is? The second thing is, end of life, or where you die, is usually where you feel safe, where you feel safest. And sometimes the two coincide. that can be your home that you've actually stayed in for years, you've raised your children in, you've lived, and your possessions are here. That's where your home is. Sometimes, as you say, for immigrants, home is back home. My mother is from St. Lucia. She's living in London. I'm the other side of the world. What do I do when she becomes unwell? It's easier for me to get back to London, but I may not have time. Also, I'm lucky in that, my job allows me the financial stability to be able to do that. However, she may want to get back to St. Lucia, but she doesn't have a home. Well, she has a home in St. Lucia, but it's not somewhere that she could really call home because her possessions are not there. She has family there that is less around than they used to be because obviously people have moved on. We are living in a society where people have moved all around the world, and we're not living in that kind of cultural landscape that you painted from the beginning in Colombia, where people are living with their communities, and certainly in many cultures, being part of a community and growing up with your aunts and your uncles, the parents, your grandparents. In New Zealand, they would call it whānau. It's your friends and family. It's your sometimes your social network. That allows you to have much more of a feeling of safety and a link back to generations, intergenerational rituals and way we deal with life and death. So from that perspective, we've lost that, becoming an international community now where, as young people, we're traveling around the world and we're setting up our lives in very distant places. But I think we all, and it seems to me that you're trying to find that kind of balance between, hey, I'm here, but I'm also, part of me is back.
Yeah, my heart is there.
Yeah.
The heart hasn't arrived yet.
Yes, maybe. And maybe as people spend more time, certainly for myself, I've lived in the UK, grew up in the UK. Do I call the UK home? It's very difficult for me. The color of my skin does have an impact on, how I feel home is, but also the colonialism of the UK and what's happened in the past. So there's an element of, do I really feel at home there? When I lived in Italy, or in Spain, the kind of word for someone who wasn't from here was literally translated to stranger. Yes. So you never really feel that is that home? You're never really going to feel that you're home because you're not part of that culture that you've been brought in. So I think there's that element of, we all have to make our own way. And when you live in different countries, you then try and say, well, maybe home is where our possessions are. I don't know. Maybe it's where family is. It's another example. But I think it's a good question that you asked. Where do we call home? But also, where do we feel safe? Because safety is going to be where we want to be cared for, and safety is where we're going to want to die, because that is where we feel we can actually be vulnerable and allow our life as it has existed to come to a natural end, or an end that we choose at the moment. People have different options of doing that.
But I will add the logistics side, because what I have seen lately with these very young people that have been dying here in Australia is that, like, this romantic side of death, which is beautiful, like, oh my God, the miracle. We go to GoFundMe and we have $35,000 for paying for medical bills and for the registration of the corpse. That is not just going to happen in every single case. And maybe this was because you never thought about it. But the logistics side, it's important to think about resources. From my perspective, like in end-of-life planning, I always think about resources. Because then, even if you want to do something, you can quickly, like, oh, yeah, I would love to do this, but I don't have the resources to do it, or someone is going to pay for that, my family. Do they have the money for doing that?
Yeah.
So this is why I think in terms of education, we really need to be more realistic about it and not just wait until the moment to, because, you know, like all of these volunteers or all of these communities around or all of these non-for-profit can't afford for every single migrant or immigrant in the world to do this.
Yeah.
So there is a middle path in which I am at the moment. And sometimes I feel that I would love to stop time again, like during the pandemic, when you're just like, oh, I have time because I don't have to go anywhere. And to reflect about what the health system, the funeral industries, the death doulas, and all of the ecosystem of the day and die territory learn in that very specific moment of history. Because there, I think we have experiences, resources, and tools that we can use to talk about this and to have solutions. So there is a second thing that when I think about what home is not just what I want to die, it's what I want to rest for the eternity. So, you know, like, and not just that, but because I always think about my family, because I think that for some reason someone is going to cry for me, you know. Where are going with my ashes? Or I'm going to be here in Australia, in a cemetery, in the sea, half of them here in Australia, half of them in Colombia. I don't know. Yeah. Will I just send a box with some ashes to every single member, friend, so they can plant a tree or something? During the pandemic, I think we all developed tools, technological tools, and brilliant ideas to meet in the middle. Because this idea of being fully present, like physically present, is not going to happen. And I think that we also need to understand that not every single family member or every single person that it's important for you is going to be there for you for many, many reasons. So at the beginning, you asked me about the relationship that Colombians have with death. There is not such a thing. But I think that during the pandemic, we developed as a society and as a global society, because I think that's very relevant to the context, new ideas. So if you ask me, one of the things that I have been thinking about is having a living funeral. So, hi people, I will die. I just want to say bye to everyone. And it can be on Zoom. Or, you know, like I can use an online platform to organize something that it's meaningful and a beautiful moment in which I will have the time and the space to say goodbye and to listen to what people have to say. So rituals, online rituals, were the best way that as an end-of-life doula I have found in order to help people to navigate this where's home, and where is home, and how to say goodbye to people. And rituals happened. They happen not just at the end of life. You know, it's not just funeral, but you can start them beforehand. You can start them at the moment of your diagnosis if you want to, or when you are really feeling that the end is just coming closer and closer. But you also can have funerals or rituals after you die, and not just one. Who says one? With the pandemic, I can tell you that before it was like a huge funeral with 1,000 people. We were not able to meet because of the regulations and the pandemic and the face mask and whatever. So people have 10, 5, or a very important number of ceremonies after they pass, in which people came together, you know, like with the ashes or with the tree or different places all over the world to talk about you and to have like this communal moment, community moment to process and to grieve together in beautiful ways. In beautiful ways. And for that you don't need a doula or a doctor, you know, like it was just community based. Like, we need to talk about it. We need to organize this.
I mean, I think that it's probably a good way to wrap up the conversation, because I think the pandemic provided a lot of opportunity for creativity and innovation in many, many different ways. And I think that I've said this already in the past, that what the pandemic did from a healthcare perspective was make the people in cities and metro areas feel what it is like not to have services like the rural and remote areas do. Well, that's their normal. So they actually potentially cope better because they were used to not having things, and working as communities to get to what they need to get done. So get what they need to get done, but also to support each other to get through difficult times, which was not only the pandemic, but also death and dying that was happening. People were being born, and they couldn't get to see the newborns. So there's also the kind of development of technology where, ashes can be used in very different ways.
Jewelry.
Exactly. So there's many different things that we need to work on, and certainly if it's brought death and dying back into the community and out of the hospital setting and the hospices, then that's a good thing, because it means that people will start to think about these conversations, like you say, in planning the end of their lives, and also how we remember people. I mean, there's that kind of saying that people are never forgotten as long as there's someone talking about them. And that's why I kind of think that the kind of Dia de los Muertos idea of Mexico, Mexican culture, that is somehow enabling us to always remember those ancestors that have died. And in some respects, our ancestors are always with us. I mean, that's another, different cultures have this belief, but they are with us because they're in our genes, they're in the molecules that make us up. And so therefore we carry those ancestors with us that provide the wisdom that we then take forward into the new era that we are moving into, with different cultures coming together, but also different technologies and advances in medicine and, in other areas of healthcare.
I completely agree. And, like at the beginning of the conversation, we were like, oh, yeah, I go back to Colombia, I stay here. And that's like the only two options. But when I start thinking, and when I talk to people that are in my situation, and you start telling them what are the different funeral options. So, like here, that's an important conversation, I really think, from the beginning, healthcare system. When you start being more transparent and you start educating people about the funeral options and not just the healthcare options, and you tell them how many different services are out there. Oh, yeah, you want to make jewelry out of your ashes? Guess what? You can. Do you want to throw your ashes in Colombia, in Argentina, and in Australia? Guess what? You can. So you empower people not just by giving them the options of going back or staying, and that's it, but also making them realize that in the between, we have developed services, ideas, and technologies that clearly are not what they are thinking, that they're not perfect, but they can help. And part of that is memorials and rituals. Online.
Well, we've had memorials and rituals that we've developed through cultures, but then obviously they have to change now into a modern world and what we do.
And storytelling.
And storytelling is a big part of that. So, look, thank you for sharing your story with us today. I think that, like you say, there are many things for us to think about going forward. The planning is a really good thing. And obviously, there's not two options, but you have to consider the options that are available, because much like a birth plan, you can have it all planned in one way and then something else happens. And sometimes that uncertainty that we have in life is something that we also need to, live with and grapple with. We may have a plan, but it may change. And so, there'll be these options to be thinking about, and both of them have their merits, but it's kind of, when the time comes, I'm sure that thinking about it would have made a huge difference to how your plans go. So
and thinking about it realistically.
Yeah, I think that's another part, because we have hope for the best, but plan for the worst.
Or hope for the best and plan for the creative.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just like so many options. That's my call, even for the like for the funeral services here in Australia, to also think about like options for us. Like how to deliver these ashes, not just the repatriation, which is pretty expensive, and people don't know anything about it. So yeah,
I think there are some funeral directors that are changing their ways,
yes,
and I think that that's come through.
They are
Certainly last decade or so. I've seen that.
So thank you very much for having me and my voice. I hope that this was, like this whole conversation about home and home for what, or like what is that? Like what is that concept? I think it's a very good question for helping people planning and also educating them around all of the global options that they can have, and not being this either here or here.
Yeah.
But maybe there is.
Well, hopefully people can have more time to plan for that, because sometimes those questions come too late, and then home is kind of where they can just get to, really. So thank you very much for being part of this. I'm sure it will generate a lot of discussion. So thank you for all the work you're doing, and take care.